I was not expecting to read this book so soon. But the first line hooked me as if I were a fish, thinking I was about to nibble on a nice little worm and swim away in peace. Here's the first line. Daniel Boone was too far away to hear his oldest boy's screams as the tall Indian tore out the 16-year-old's fingernails, one by one. Now this line makes a bold promise to the reader. And I'll say, the book successfully fulfilled that promise. I wasn't, again, expecting to read this book so soon. I'd been looking for a biography of Daniel Boone for a while, though not urgently, and I found a copy of this book on clearance for about $6. So why not? The book would be on my shelf for a while where it could collect dust. But of course, that didn't happen. And this book goes way beyond Daniel Boone. It's really the subtitle, Daniel Boone and the Fight for America's Frontier. It focuses more on the latter than the former. And this is fine, because Boone played a central role in that fight, and you still get much of the obligatory table stakes of a biography. You also get lots of details about supporting characters, including the British and the various Indian tribes. George Washington even makes an appearance since Boone was on that fated expedition that kicked off the French and Indian War. The authors set the scene and context well. The reader also gets delightful nuggets of character from the supporting cast. For example, Sir William Johnson, the Crown's superintendent for the Department of Indian Affairs, became the third largest landowner in North America, thanks to a gift from the Iroquois Confederacy. He was this larger-than-life figure, and the opportunities of the American colonies suited his personality. Had he remained in Ireland, he, and I quote, would have undoubtedly fallen into that category of cavalier who regularly emanated a scent of strong tobacco, single malt, and other men's wives. And that is an example of the colorful writing you'll find in this book as well. We also learn of General Geoffrey Amherst, who had a hobby of posing for portraits in medieval suits of armor. He was one of many whose hubris would cost him in the battle with the Indians. Now, it is the Indians who the authors spend more time on. It is clear where their sympathies lie, and they cover a great deal of the Indian ways of life, their culture, and some of their traditional practices. For example, some captives were subjected to an adoption ceremony to allow them to assume the identity of a dead relative. The adoption ceremony itself usually required the captives' clothes to be burned in a symbolic fire, after which they were scrubbed with pungent greases or oils, the ablution serving to wash out their white blood. Or what about the habit of a certain Indian warrior who besieged Boonesboro? What most riled the defenders, however, was the warrior's habit of firing off a round and then turning and lifting his breechclout to waggle and pat his bare ass at the pioneers. Boone was summoned. We learn about individuals such as Cornstalk and Little Carpenter and Blackfish as they come onto the scene and disappear into history. But despite this focus, the authors never fall to the level of elevating the noble savage. They do not shy away from their brutality. They also clearly respect the courage and gumption required of long hunters like Boone and the near insanity it required to tame a wilderness. I never felt like I was being talked down to or preached at. Despite being functionally illiterate, Boone was an impressive man, and the book never shies away from that truth. In some places, you can almost feel the awe and disbelief of the authors as they type out the words. Now, so many writers of history content themselves with laying down the raw facts with no sense of artistry. They care not about painting with words. But the authors of Blood and Treasure are having fun, and they want you to have fun. They love words, and they want you to love words too. They will lay down an apt metaphor in one place, slide in a joke with a wink in another, and then call down mythological language to hammer home the gravity of a situation. Here are some examples. He wore the grin of a man who killed weasels with his teeth. Or, his face had cultivated such a density of facial hair that it qualified as a topiary. When wrapping things up, the book tells us how a template had now been established for eventually defeating the Indians west of the Mississippi. The Indians would continue to win some skirmishes and battles, but the end was written. And the authors conclude with the following phrase: Goliath's terrible sword had been unsheathed and removed from the temple. That's not a line I was expecting in a book like this. The authors were also not afraid to use big words, but they have such command of the vocabulary that I could tease out the meaning based on context, and never felt like they were showing off or just trying to be smart, just using the best word they could for what they wanted to say. So I give this book a 9 out of 10. I docked 1 point because the maps could have been better. In any book with any sort of military campaigns, you need more maps.